Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Revolution Gathering. Glad you all can be here. It's the beginning of a new year. It's January, what are we, the 3rd or the 4th? Gosh. I don't have my phone to look at the date, but it's early in January. And it's Sunday. So, welcome to Revolution. And we are going to get started on our Galatians talk. I would like to welcome my good friend Brian Yarborough. Welcome to Yarborough Country. He has taken over the putting up the podcasts for Josh, and Brian has been a lifelong friend of mine. You can see our Q&A here on YouTube, or you can listen to it on any of the podcasts. We did a Q&A, I guess maybe a month and a half ago, and see Brian there. But he's been a friend for, gosh, I wanted to say 10 years, but it's been longer than 10 years. It's been a long time. But my memory escapes me right now. So today we're going to start our Galatians. Now last year we did Galatians in 16 weeks? Only took 16 weeks to do Galatians. This year, who knows? That's the thing I love about Galatians is I have a kind of an idea where we're going. We focused a lot on scholarship last year. And so this year, going to try to take it into a little bit of a different direction and just, what's applicable, what ideas are important to us, what do we need right now? And we've talked about this before, like, the world is divided, but I don't think I can emphasize that enough. I'd say the United States is the most divided I've ever seen it in my lifetime. Now, of course, there's been other things, Vietnam War and segregation and things like that, but we seem to be really divided, and not just in like two, but like in all sorts of subsections, and it seems like folks have like to see us argue about identity politics and about poverty and about all these different things. So we're going to look at that and realize that this letter was written by Paul probably around AD 48, between 48 and 55. We've got about a window right there where they believe it was written, to this Celtic tribe of folks who are living with Christian Jews as well, and they're both having a conflict issue here of what it is to really be a Christian. And luckily they solved it, and that stopped, and no one argued ever again about what a real Christian is. Just a few wars later and all that kind of stuff, and we're still arguing over it. Sometimes I think maybe we should just let people, think what they want to think. And if their theology is destructive, then maybe we have either a tough conversation or we do our own thing and try to spread the right information and expose misinformation, hopefully within a non-violent way. And non-violence just isn't physical, but it's also of the mind and tongue. Often one of the things I think seems to haunt Christians on no matter what side it is bitterness. I see a lot of very bitter Christians, and if they've left conservative Christianity, they're bitter at that. If they're conservative Christian, they're bitter at the world, or they're bitter at the people like them. So it's people who were like them. People deconstructing often are like crapping on the people like that were like them before. And that's the fact is when we change and when we grow and when we evolve, we should be grateful to be there. And then all of a sudden be like, well, I found out something new, so you're all idiots. Just be glad that you're there. You made it there. And now how do we look back on things? How do we have these tough conversations? How do we, go back and help people get to where we're at? And as we talked about, I think last year, I love that, in my last talk, being gentle and kind and respectful in our conversations. And so that's a lot of what we're going to be looking at. One of my favorite verses in Galatians is where Paul says, if you're constantly biting and devouring one another, beware that you'll be consumed by one another. And that's one thing we try to do at Revolution, is make sure that we're not being consumed or we're not consuming other people, that we're not biting and devouring one another. And then when we are being bitten and devoured, we step back and go, okay, how can we handle this in a non-violent, respectful way? So, I would say though, with what's coming up, with being so divided, with what we see happen with all the wars all over the world, not just Israel, but Congo, all over the world, there's wars. And with the new president coming in, a lot of things seem really divisive there. It just seems like there's a lot of divisive issues. We've had, these this mass killing in New Orleans, the guy blowing up the soldier blowing up his truck in front of the Trump Towers. I think we may be in for a lot, but I think this is hopefully and I don't mean this in a grateful way, but I'm hoping that this is what this revolution, what this work, what this message has been preparing us all for, is how to steer ourselves through these tough times and these hard times and these times of division. And that's why I've always started with Galatians, is because I think Galatians is a book that's trying to bring divided people together and create an atmosphere where either there is no strangers or that we're all strangers in a way, and that allows us to have grace. And we're going to look at things like, well, if we accept grace, why does that make us more loving? Why does that make us more compassionate? We want to try to dig down into those reasons and why that works for us and how that works for us. That's not going to be today. Today we're just going to start, we're going to go about halfway through one. But like I said, it was written by the Apostle Paul. As you know, I'm a very big Paul fan. A lot of people don't like Paul. I've been reclaiming Paul for years and trying to get people to realize, like, the 7 genuine letters by Paul, what that really means to Paulinian theology and how we can grow and learn from that. But often, it's strange to me, often people who don't want to embrace that, say they're literalists, but then when you find out, well, those books literally weren't written by Paul, then their ideas of literalism seem to change. And I think why I'm so I don't read the pastoral epistles because I believe they're forgeries. And why am I that way? As I think partially is because I was raised kind of a biblical literalist. And for me, I'm like, well, and I mean, that's changed over years, but there's little things that are always hard to let go. Anyway, Galatians 1, the Celtic tribes and the Christian Jewish tribes living together. Paul, the apostle, if you want to, apostle is usually what it meant at that time, and Paul, everybody's like self-proclaimed apostle, which he kind of was, but he says the guys, Peter and all those guys made him an apostle. But what it really means is someone who has been sent. So apostle is someone who has been sent. When I was growing up, if someone called themselves an apostle, they were always like, I'm an apostle, brother. I'm a brother apostle so-and-so. And it usually was that they were coming to rebuke you or give you bad news. Unfortunately, some people like to really use religion for pain and bad news. So let's look at Galatians 1. This is always an exciting few months for me to do this. Oh, and thanks for everybody for being patient. My ex had an old friend invite her to brunch last minute, and I just said, yeah, I'll watch the kids, but the kids were like on 10 or maybe 11. And they're really hilarious when they're 11, but it's almost impossible to do a talk. So my son wanted you all to see that his fishing Garfield is here next to Gumby. I was supposed to let you know that. And he also reminded me to tell everybody to like and subscribe and turn on those notifications. So there you go. Galatians 1. Paul, an apostle, sent neither by human commission or from the main or from human authority, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all of the members of God's family who are with me. Now, usually when someone says, I have been appointed, I am self-appointed, by God, that's usually a huge red flag. And I've got to wonder if, like, how many letters the Galatians got from people like that, and they were like, "Oh, I got another letter from one of God's chosen people." Now that won't cut it. I remember I one time was doing an interview years ago, and I was like, Jay, why are you gay affirming? And this is, and I was just tired, and I didn't want to give all the, well, if you look at this book and you look at Romans 1, and if you divide, and do all that stuff. So I said, well, I just felt like God spoke to my heart. And it's so funny that, like, a lot of my conservative friends who are always like, "Oh, the Lord's been speaking to me, Jay." They're all like, "Oh, God's been speaking to Jay. Oh, God told him, so it must be okay." I mean, it was just like, you know, something you don't ever want to say. I was like, "Well, I just feel like God told me this." Especially when it's wrong. I remember when I was a kid, growing up in the Assemblies of God, if someone spoke in tongues really loud, someone would have to interpret it. And so at my dad's church, at PTL, there was a big church on Sunday that we met in. And someone would get up, and do the tongues. And then someone would get up and go, "I am the Lord God if saith this." And it was so funny to me is that God spoke in King James. So that must be one of his favorite versions of the Bible, because it came much later, but I guess he digs speaking in Elizabethan. But I always found that strange too. God's message was very Shakespearean. He's very. God is very dramatic. We won't give God our genders today. To the church of Galatia, grace to you, peace from God our Father and our Lord Jesus Christ, who gave himself for our sins, set free from the present evil age, according to thy will of God and the Father, to whom the glory forever and ever. Amen. Now, when we were reading this last year, we were taking it from a more of a, like, time it was written in, the scholarly reasons why it was written, to whom it was written, why it was written. And right now I'm kind of wanting to look at this as like kind of like okay, how does this apply to me and you? How does this, what does this say right now? Like, Paul's traveled through time and we have this message. So I want to kind of look at it that way. And strangely enough, he skips the usual niceties. But what you've got to remember is you've got this community of people who are new followers of Christianity. And they've pretty much come from, what we would call almost like a New Age type of religion, where they worship the seas and they worship the God, the seas as gods, and the trees, and these things, and carry a sack of crystals around their neck like I did in high school. Never tell Pete Rollins that ever. But so you have this very, like, kind of, oh, we're kind of spiritual but not religious group, and then you've got the Jewish Christians who feel like you need to convert to Judaism to order to become a Christian, and they've followed Judaism and the laws and the rules their whole life. And so they're a little bit uptight, and then you got these really loose folks over here going like, well, whatever goes. And somehow that can seem just like the face of America. You know what I mean? Like, how we think of each other in like a binary way. Like, oh, we got the liberal hoopy doopies, and we got the super, fundamentalist Christians. Now that's obviously would be scapegoating and a real, like, just ridiculous, that type of thinking. But because there's so many nuances within humanity, and so many different nuances in that. Some of these people over here are really awful and legalistic in their own ways, and some of these people over here in their own ways and kind and loving and hopeful. I mean, that's being a human being. Is we're all different and unique, and it's strange that we can't believe that other people think differently than we do. But this is what this kind of thing is happening here, and this message has gotten back to the Apostle Paul. And he helped start this community, probably in person, but we're not sure. So Lord Jesus Christ, who gave himself to sin to set us free from this present evil age, according to the will of our God. Now, we talked a little bit about the present evil age and what that meant in scholarship and things like that last year, so you can refer back to that talk if you'd like. That's what I like about these, is kind of building little levels of different ways of seeing this book. If it was up to me, I would just do Galatians once a year and retire, or just once a year and then do nothing. But I was thinking about this: set us free from this present evil age. And one of the things that I think is so harshly done is that we see so much horror happening in the world, and then we kind of have to feel like we have to choose sides, and then we just discount or belittle those who aren't on our side. And sometimes it's even through like just miscommunication. Miscommunication happens so often where we say one thing and someone hears it through their own lens, through their own brain, and it says something else. For example, I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday, and I was talking about Palestine and Israel, and I said, I'm just worried about the dead kids. That seems to be the thing that focuses on me. But they read that me as saying like, well, I care about the dead children, unlike you. And that wasn't what I was saying, and I was probably poorly communicating it. And rightfully so, they went back and like, you self-righteous son of a, you think you're the only one who cares about these human beings suffering? I was like, oh, no, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. So how we communicate with one another can often be important, even how we hear people. And I think it's important sometimes when we're hearing, we can repeat back to them like, okay, so you said this, did you mean this? I mean, I know this seems like simple things, but it really could save us a lot of trouble and a lot of problems in the future. But when I think of this present age, I think of these wars. I think of Congo. I think what's Israel and Palestine. I think about poverty in this country. I think about the suffering of people. I also think of something like that's called the hierarchy of suffering, is where sometimes we're unable to, instead of able to empathize and sympathize with one another, we often want to say, well, I've suffered more than you, and you haven't suffered as much as me. But then if you really wanted to do that, you could broaden that and turn it on someone like that and be like, okay, well then, how are you compared to the women in Afghanistan, or families in Palestine, or an 8-year-old in the Congo who has to carry a machine gun? I mean, you could just continue to do it, and you could do all this like, well, what? And one of the reasons I think like that's not fair to do, but in another way, it's a good thing to think about, is because I think if we start thinking of the world as humanity and a human community as the whole world, rather than just, well, we're in this country and what we suffer here is what's really important, and maybe that one group over there, but there is suffering everywhere. And I think if we got out of the competition of hierarchy of suffering, and I'm not saying like, oh, I got stuck in traffic yesterday, I'm sorry your family got killed, but I was stuck in traffic, not like dumbasses or idiots or ignorant. But with the concept of going like, a lot of people suffer. One of the things I love about Reverend Barber, civil rights leader, is he brings people together, not through gender or race or religion or politics, but he brings people together through poverty. And he's like, there's majority of us in America are in poverty or poor, or one check away or one medical bill away from losing everything, or being in debt, becoming homeless, following bankruptcy. And what he does is he tries to bridge the divide with poverty, and making sure, hey, everybody deserves to have 3 meals a day. Everybody deserves to have a job that can pay them well. Everybody, deserves to have rent that they can afford. And it's one of those things that really a lot of people can agree on, and it's life changing. I've talked about it in the past, so I won't beat it. But I think another thing that could bring us together is that we all suffer. We all feel loss. We all feel humiliation. We all feel like we don't belong at times. Some of us don't care if we belong at times, which is kind of a nice feeling too. But then you also get lonely. We all, grieve. We all go through these things, this pain and hurt and loss, and so many unique ways that just the underlying pain and discouragement and suffering, I think, is something that could bring us together. And I'm not saying we're all just going to sit together and listen to The Cure, but the fact is hearing people out and what they've been through and not just jumping to, well, I've been through this. Like we're trying to excuse like, well, I didn't do it because I went through this and you went through that and you did it, so you must be wrong. We're constantly hitting each other with judgment. And what's happening in Galatians is they're saying, well, we've done this the right way. We've done it the proper way, and we've done it our whole lives, and we know how it works. You guys have just come along and accepted it, and that's not enough. You haven't gone through the rituals that we've gone through. You haven't gone through the circumcision that we've gone through. You don't hold those signs that we've done. You don't hold these holidays that we've kept our whole life. You don't add up. So often, rather than saying, well, we have Christ that brings us together, we have this faith that unifies us, it becomes about, well, we've suffered more, or we've gone through more, or we've done more, or we're smarter than you, and we know more than you, and it's we're the chosen people, and you're not, and then we can get divided again, and this continues to happen. But I guarantee you, the most conservative Republican and the most liberal Democrat, both have suffered and experienced loss, and had to mourn ones that they've loved and mourn relationships. And go through that type of thing. I don't know how many times, last year, the day before my birthday, I got to hang out with a buddy of mine who I've known since I was 4 years old. And we just talked about our life's experiences, like what it was like to grow up in kind of a bubble where you had money and stuff like that. And then at a young age, his father passed away. My parents had a scandal. But then when you have to get on your own and you have to do it, and it's not as easy as you thought it was going to be because you had this silver spoon in your mouth for a little while, and what the struggle was like, and going through loss and having, sickness and mental health issues and struggling to make ends meet and, becoming, working class people and what that was. And we were able to just relate on that. Now, I'm pretty sure from little things I said and he said that we had different politics, but we didn't need that. What we needed is that we had both had a very similar experience, a very similar loss, and a very experienced, neat, interesting childhood that brought us together, and we'll be brothers until the day we die because we've lived through an experience that brought us together, and we're not going to let faith or politics or things like that keep us divided. We're going to let that strangeness of a unique situation, which is like a brotherly bond for us. It's bigger, than all the distractions. And I think I freaked him out a little bit because he drives a big truck, and Ryan's kind of a manly man. He's a short guy, but he was always the toughest kid around. I mean, just always just tough as nails. Broke his arms all the time, all this stuff, and would laugh about it. Me, I would be crying if the weather changed. And he was like the opposite. But we were saying goodbye. He's in this huge truck, and there's like this huge thing in the middle of us. I just grab him and just start crying. I'm so glad you're here. I'm just so glad we got to see each other, because it was obviously we were both feeling a lack that we were missing for a long time, and we were able to kind of have that moment of just feeling a little bit of recognized, some of our own interesting suffering and things recognized by one another. Sorry if I seem like I'm babbling, but this is me personalizing Galatians for you. But when I see this evil age, that's when I talk about, workers not being given livable wages, people killing other people, school shootings, all these type of things. Us being divided and having the powers that be use our identities to keep us divided, that type of thing. Not a country where we spend more money on wars than we do on our poor and our homeless and our sick. And we're becoming more poor and more homeless and more sick over time. And I think that's also part of this evil age within the world and the country that I live in, and probably some of the European countries that of my friends who watch this as well, or England. Some of you left the European Union. I don't know what to call you anymore. Mates, blokes. So this is an incredible divided time. But anyway, let's jump into the part 6, where he goes right here. He goes, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another gospel, but there are some of you who are confusing you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we are angels from heaven should proclaim to you a gospel contrary to what we proclaim to you, let that one be accursed. As we have said before, so now I repeat, if anyone proclaims to you a gospel contrary to what you've received, let that one be accursed. And this letter could probably be sent to every denomination ever made, because we've all added something, twitched something, made a little change, and then been like, we're the right ones, and you are the wrong ones, you know? I mean, like you have, you know, and then those denominations split because like, oh, well, there's this thing and there's that thing, you know, and it's just different of opinions. But when you've got like, when you're threatening people's eternal souls for having a difference, that's ridiculous and not quite fair. But let's look at this. I'm astonished. And I love this letter because it's one of the greatest letters written on grace, but it's also a rebuke letter, which blows my mind. And it's also like kind of like Paul trying to prove that I'm really an apostle. No, really. But I'm astonished that you are quickly deserting the one who called you in grace of Christ and turning to a different gospel. So I think what we have to realize is, what is grace? When we talk about grace, we usually do Paul Tillich's sermon as well after this. I'm a creature of habit in some ways. Where he talks about grace, and he talks about you're accepted and that there's no need to change, and that you are accepted just as you are, right where you are accepted, this concept of grace. And grace, he says grace is as unification, coming back together. He sees sin as separation, and sin is kind of, grace is kind of bringing us back together. And so this idea of getting away from grace, that we hurt in grace, you know, it seems that this is something that happens really fast with all of us. And it happened fast with me. So I grew up very Assemblies of God, thought God hated me, thought I could lose my salvation. I felt like salvation was sand slipping through my fingers constantly. Thought God hated me, all that, blah, 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 blah. And then I started to understand grace. A friend of mine started to talk to me about grace and showed me Galatians and showed me Corinthians, or showed me Rome, you know, some of all those Paul's writings about grace. And it really blew my mind. I was like, I'm accepted. I'm loved. Oh, just the way I am. I'm loved just the way. I don't have to be this or I don't have to be that. I'm accepted. I am accepted. And then, you know, what I realized is I weaponized grace in some ways, because I'd be at something with my dad and he'd be talking to all these people and my dad would be like, son, get up and tell them about grace. And I would get up and be like, where were you? You didn't show us any grace. You know what I mean? I was just like hammer, you know. And it's funny because it's like, here you get this free gift, you're accepted, you're loved, it's unconditional. And we all are just turning away to a different gospel right away. It's like, I've got grace, but you don't. Or I've got grace now, and you should have had grace then, and you didn't, so now you're going to pay. You know, and that's not grace. So it's not just those people who turn away from it. It's often all of us. You know, look at all these like deconstruction podcasts and things like that. They're not usually the most graceful people towards people who think like they just thought. You know, the same people who are thinking the way they are, and they were like, I don't like this, so I'm going to look at this. And now they're going like, oh, those closed-minded bastards. But I'm like, dude, you were just a closed-minded bastard a few weeks ago. You know, people are like, oh, I can't forgive that guy who wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye. It's too late. You know, I was like, dude, I was trying to tell you guys 20 years ago that wasn't a good book. You know, the point is like, it doesn't matter. Like, we can't, you know, grace, when you get grace, grace is for everybody. But it is a process for us all to, because we're still struggling to really accept we're accepted. Because right now it's just kind of something that lives on the top of our brain. And we're trying to digest that. But I think you'll realize is that for a lot of people who, you think about these signs, like the people who are like, repent from hell, turn to hell. And then like, okay, I get it. You don't want me to go to this fiery place. But then they like, well, I think if I drew some flames on there and did a little art project and made them really know how. And then you start to see that they almost really get a joy out of making these signs and telling people that they're hellbound. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, the flames that I drew are really, I think people will get it on this one. And they're like, oh, I'm just saved by grace, you're gonna go to hell, and it's like this hateful thing. So it's like we all of a sudden take this forgiveness and this free gift and turn away. I mean, I think the Lord's Prayer growing up as a kid, that every eye closed, every head bowed, stick up your hand, stick up your hand. I see that hand, I see that hand, I see that hand. And all right, if you've accepted Jesus, now I want you to walk up here. Because if you don't walk up here, you deny God and then you're not really a Christian. You're like, well, why did you do the whole secret prayer thing? Like, well, so I'm secret for 5 minutes, and now if I don't do this, I'm not a real Christian. I mean, you see how it works to almost automatically click into like, well, now you've got to be an example. I don't think many, like, I don't think I would recommend many people go into ministry. One of the reasons I don't think they should be teaching the Bible in school is because they don't have biblical scholars teaching there. I mean, it's like, yeah, you can read it, but you really need people who understand it to help you wrestle with it and grasp it. This should be something that teachers who have no knowledge of what the book is really saying, trying to teach it, and how it means, and what words are allegories, and what is real, what was written by real people, and what was, they just don't know these things. Anyway, so it's so quickly that we all turn from grace, even when we get it, even when we accept it. We're always kind of looking for the asterisk of who doesn't belong, who doesn't get it. And that's why I do the thing where I say grace is anarchy, because it's always going to go against your law and your rules and your asterisk. It's just going to burn your asterisk down and say it's for this person too. Well, what about this? What about Jeffrey? What about that? You mean that's not fair? No. It's not. It's reunion. It's great. It's acceptance. It's not up to you. It's not fair. You're right. It's grace. It's scandalous. It's insane. You know, and it's way more about living now than it is some afterlife that we always try to focus. Well, they get to do. I mean, just people don't understand what this idea of learning to realize that you're accepted by something greater than yourself, the transformation that can have on us. So what happens is you've got this community of people, both people understanding grace, both hearing grace from the freaking mouth of the Apostle Paul. And they've already turned on each other and saying, you're not real Christian. No, you're not real Christians. No, you're doing it the wrong way. Well, if you don't do it my way, you're going to hell. And now it's taken the whole community and torn it apart. And people say, that's the problem with religion. Or you could say, well, that's the problem with us not realizing what grace is. That's the problem with us not realizing how we accept ourselves, but also how to accept others when we accept ourselves. And not blame others for the fact that we did not accept ourselves beforehand. We play a role in that. And the 12 steps, you learn, you have these resentments. And what do you learn a lot about these resentments you hold towards people is that you have to also look at what your process was in that. What did you do in that relationship to cause the problems? You can only clean up your side of the street, not theirs. You kind of have to take responsibility for your own stuff. And so often grace isn't really taught that way. I've just seen grace so many times in salvation, all this stuff preached and forgiveness, and just watched people become hellions and just become, like bikers. Like, I went to a biker church, and some of those guys were some of the most judgmental, angry, could be some really hateful folks because they came out through such a horrible thing. He's like, I don't want to go back there. I came from this, and, and it was like, okay, we've missed the whole part about forgiveness and grace and acceptance. We've missed it. And I can't blame everyone, because you do have things like the pastoral epistles and different books like this that add additions later that are a little bit more of that judgmental legalism, causes questions, and not most people aren't willing to take a deeper dive into the Bible. And then once they do, they're not willing to question out loud because they've been told if they do, they're out again. Once again, no grace. So as you see, we have a problem in Christianity across the board of of deserting the one who called you in the grace of Christ and turning to a different gospel. So we all have this way of creating a different gospel. I grew up evangelical, but now I do the social justice gospel, and I tell those evangelical bastards, did anyone ever calling you a bastard make you feel like you were in? Did infighting, has it ever really worked? It's like why war makes no sense is it just violence begets violence begins violence. It's a never-ending process. Children under this violence and these horrors, no matter how particular and complex these guys are, ideas are, all they know is I have a dead family and these are the people that made my family dead and I've got to get revenge for this. And if I have a faith that backs me up for that, there's more violence. And then what happens is the other group goes, oh, they killed my family, and it's just boom, 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 boom. I mean, it's one of the saddest things that this is still how we deal with conflict, is by killing one another and blowing one another up. To me, is horrifically sad. So that's the other gospel. We pervert the gospel constantly, and we're all part of it, and we all have to keep, it's progress, folks. It's not perfection, but it's something to think about. And I'll promise you, it's not easy, because you'll always have people. I mean, I've got friends who've been doing this similar work and have been doing it for just a couple years, and I try to talk to them and they just go, oh, well, you've just been so led astray, rather than being like, oh, well, you've been studying for 30 years. What have you learned, And it says some are confusing you, which happens. And that's why we talk about the Bible. That's why we go through social justice issues. That's why we look at social justice issues, and why we look at biblical scholarship. Why we just go, okay, well, let's look at the scholarship. Let's look at why this book was written, to whom it was written. Is it an actual, written by this author? What was the reason behind this? I mean, a lot of the reasons we do that is so we don't become so scapegoaty, so we can read it within its context, so we can learn what it means, and so we don't create this kind of grace that's in vain, that excludes others constantly. I was reading this book on community by Todd McGowan, and he's like, just by the base of community is there's always an outsider. So for me at this point, I'm going like, well, maybe we shouldn't, I knew in Revolution when we were in Atlanta that the church couldn't be the community. I knew that. I'm like, we got to be a part of a community. We can't be out of the community. And sometimes I even think that maybe community is the wrong idea for the church. Maybe I think it's that we wander the earth as strangers with other human beings, and we are, show grace and love and compassion and forgiveness, and we fight for justice, and we fight power, not people, and when we see people, we don't see them as the enemy, but we see the misinformation as the enemy, and we become people we want to clarify this, and we figure out unique and interesting and non-violent ways to make these things better, and to help people change, and to help ourselves not turn back. See, that's the thing, is now we have to turn back to this original concept of grace and go like, oh, that's the thing with like legalism and the law, is it's always wanting to add things. It's always wanting to perfect things. It's like, well, grace isn't enough. Grace isn't good enough. I don't know how many times I've heard that. Even things where you hear like cheap grace and things like that. I'm going, well, it's not cheap, it's free. So we're always wanting to add things to this, and we fear, like the liberals feel, that grace is going to make you not help anybody in social justice work, and you're just going to sit back and just get rich. And often the conservatives think about grace as this concept of like, well, you're just going to go out and sin and smoke cigarettes and drink beers and have sex and watch rated R movies and listen to rock and roll music. It's like everybody has these fears of grace, rather than just being like, that's the journey that these people are on. This is what they're going through. And, let's just be glad that they've made it to this point, and be grateful that we've made it to this point, rather than being like, well, I have to compare, or I have to judge, or I have to set them straight. I think the people we should be helping set straight are maybe those people who are seeing others as less than, or treating others as less than, or treating workers like they just are just tools rather than human beings, deserving of love and life and home and work and being able to feed their families. And what I like about this here is, because we often hear like, well, my pastor says, my pastor says it, or I read it in this book, and I do the same thing because I read a lot of scholarship and philosophy. But it gets here, it says, but even if we or angels from heaven should proclaim another gospel. So, I mean, what I was thinking down here, I wrote notes like, even if your favorite politician or your favorite preacher is preaching something against love, I would even go as far as, even if the Bible is keeping you from loving someone, then you need to question the Bible, because I believe love is the trump card. I do believe that when it is in 1 John, it says that God is love. Or even if it's your favorite party or your favorite tribe or your favorite, like you have to go like, it doesn't matter who's bringing this falsely. We have to be able to question even those we love and care about. And that's part of disagreeing well. That's part of saying, well, this doesn't make sense to me. Can you help me make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, well, let me try to make sense to where I'm coming from. And you say, Jay, what's all this stuff about communication? Blah, blah, blah. Well, this is part of what's the breakdown is happening here is they can't accept that the other is accepted. And they seem to be having the conversations to the point where Paul is like, I'm going to have to just rebuild this whole thing. I have to come in and kind of tear everybody down, deconstruct, but then importantly, I need to reconstruct and make sure they're able to sit within that grace that they first heard. Ten says, am I now, this is what Paul was accused of, and I've been accused of most of my work, especially by people close to me, family. Am I now seeking human approval or God's approval? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. You know, the message of grace that everybody's accepted seems like you're trying to please everybody. But honestly, I have found out that trying to bring divided groups together, a few months ago, or gosh, almost a year ago, I sat down with a pastor and one of the people who worked with him and tried to talk about bringing people from both sides together, you know, and not scapegoating and all this stuff. And they got really angry at me and said I was acting as though reverse racism or something existed, which I didn't quite understand how they line those two up. But as you know, I often will show compassion towards my brothers and sisters who I disagree with. My conservative brothers and sisters, I said, yeah, we want them in the community because we need to disagree well. We need to learn how to be, you know, respectful and loving of one another. We need to learn from one another. And these folks just didn't see that, you know, and they're like, you don't, you know, and I did not belong there. You know, they were like, I never heard from them again. I went from being like, hey, we want you to come steep cake at our church and have a place and do all this stuff to like, one person got up and walked out really angry. The other person didn't ever talk to me again. So what often feels like, well, I'm just trying to make, is really very hard work. Because you will never please everyone. Even if you have a people-pleasing gospel, and I was like, you're all going to get rich. You know, you're still going to be people who are going to be like, here, take it. You know, like this is always going to be part of the issue. But when you follow this concept of Christ, or you follow the concept of like Martin Luther King Jr., or like the later work of Malcolm X and things like that, you know, where you're going, well, we've got to include these people. Or John Hume, also, I'm looking at these peacemakers for a reason. Is these people who are saying we've got to come together. We've got to decide together or we can't decide at all. As human beings, we have to come together as, you know, conservatives and Democrats and, you know, Green Party and all the other parties. And we all have to come together and do this together. And people go, like, they've done this and they've done that. And then they're looking at you going like, well, you do this. And, you know, and we come together and it's just, we're so divided. You know, it's this idea. And so my idea is like when you follow a real peace process, when you, like Peggy Campolo said it really well, when you're a bridge, when you try to be a bridge to bring people together, you're often walked on. And I love that because that's what happens is when you're going like, you know, I'm going to try to follow what I believe is the message of Christ and the teachings of Christ is to bring people together, to not scapegoat people and say that grace is for everyone. But people are always going to look for reasons not to love each other. I mean, I don't know. The first few years we went through Galatians here, you know, I would say there's neither male nor female, nor Jew nor Gentile, nor slave or free. A lot of the folks here in this at Revolution Gathering were angry about it and said, well, I'm this and I'm that. And all of a sudden started to identify where they, you know, what their identity was and what they thought their identity, they didn't want to give up their identity, you know, and it was really tough. It's really hard for us to die to ourselves in this concept of grace to be accepted and help others to be accepted and help others to realize that. Because we think, well, we're not practicing justice. I think there's plenty of room for justice and grace. You know, I think there's plenty of room for rebuilding the system. That's why we look so hard at communication. But the fact is we're at a point in the world where we're not even communicating with one another. I mean, I can barely have conversations about Israel and Palestine with my closest friends, much less with strangers. You know what I'm saying? So we're at a point where we're almost afraid and scared to talk to one another. So this is why I'm really hitting on communication here and hitting on grace and communication as being together. Is because it's vitally important if we want to change things. And you're not going to please everybody. And that's why Paul's saying, I'm not being a people pleaser, because everybody said, well, he's preaching grace and it's too good to be true, so he's trying to please people. You know, that he was being accused of that. You know, I am trying to challenge you. I am trying to encourage you to get out of your comfort zone. I am trying to challenge you to go, if you, well, I can't do that because I've been hurt too much. Well, then I want to challenge you to go to therapy. I want to challenge you to find a counselor. I want to challenge you to find someone you can talk to, because we know I've got crap insurance now and I can't afford to go to therapy either. So I get that. But we try to make a way. We try to find a way to heal, you know, so we can bring hope to others and we can deal with our own stuff. And that takes time. Like I said, it's progress, not perfection. Like all those first years where I was using grace as a weapon, you know, I had to learn lessons the hard way to come to this. And Paul is about to get into, in 11, he's about to start talk about how he used his own faith as a weapon and how he used it to hurt people and things like that. And so it's kind of this idea of like, hey, I've been there. I've done this. My Apostle Paul, I used my own faith to hurt people. Then I got Jesus, figured this thing out, and now I'm trying to bring people together and everybody hates me for it. So we have this very similar thing happening right here in Galatians. It's happening probably with a lot of us as we try to move through this world and through our lives. And also having to realize like, oh yeah, we've made mistakes too, you know. We were part of those mistakes as well. You know, I've been there. So anyway, that's where we're going to dive in and try to make that, find out how we can apply these ideals to our life, even when we're able to also go back and go, yeah, I have grace, but yeah, I did some crap stuff. You know, yeah, I've been there too. Yeah, I know what it's like to be judgmental. Yeah, I know what it's like to hate a group of believers or a group of people because I thought they were bad because I had it right, you know, and I had grace and they didn't. You know, I mean, I know what it's like to be there. And so it also kind of requires rigorous. No, that's not the right word. Vigorous. Let's use vigorous. That's probably not even my right word, but honesty. Let's be extreme honesty with ourselves and be honest with ourselves and look at ourselves. Often when we find out that we're lashing out or we're telling people how to live, it's often that projection is often just the only advice to ourselves or why we're upset with our own selves. So those are other things for us to look at and go through that. So I hope that this 2025, Galatians 2025, will be a growth experience for us all. And I hope you'll share this with your friends. I hope you'll let them know. Especially if this touches you in a certain way, there's probably somebody you're thinking of going like, oh, you know, I should share this with somebody. I should give this to, you know, that's one of the ways you can really help support the Revolution gathering as well, as by sharing it with other folks and letting them know what we're doing. So, you know, remember though, we turned, but it's not too late for us to turn back to grace, you know, and remember, like even through that pain and stuff, that's the very, very thing that can unite us all together, that we all have as humans, is pain, and bring us together. So, because we belong together, and I don't think the powers that be realize that. I don't think the powers that be realizes that even the very pain they've caused us, or the lack of jobs, or the lack of health care that the government on both sides has given us, is not going to realize is that our pain and stuff is what will unite us and bring us together, and hopefully create a better world for everyone, despite their political leanings or religious belief system. So, you know, remember, difference in identity is all an accident through birth. You know, some people are born in the Assemblies of God. Some people are born as Muslims. Some people are born, you know, an atheist. You know, some are born black, white, yellow, and green, and purple. We're all born, you know, Gumby. You know, but it's an accident of birth. It's just, this is, here we are. Now let's grow, let's learn, and let's see how we can be human. That's the one thing that we do all have in common, is our humanity. And how can we see that more? and live in that as a human world rather than just identities and groups and divided. So there you go. If you enjoy what you're hearing, you can, and you want to see more of it, you can go to revolutionchurch.com. Got links to all of our talks. This will all be up on podcasts as well. All the videos we've done these past couple of years are up on our YouTube channel that you're watching right now. And you can also help by making tax-deductible donation by going to revolutionchurch.com and donating there. That's really what keeps us going and keeps us on the air. So yeah, and I also work a part-time job right now to do this, to keep this going. I'm doing a lot of painting and all sorts of different kinds of like labor work, and so that's also part of it. But we could really use your support. I would really like to see Revolution in the year 2025 become a full-time job for me again, and us to be able to do more. I'm excited to have Brian on, Brian Yarborough, who just started working with us today. Just so excited about that. I've always admired him so greatly. He used to have this church called Anchor Church, and Brian is just a one-of-a-kind person. He's one of the kindest people I know, to be honest with you, in my life. And I hope that his kindness and love as well, that's really been healing to me, will also be like overflowing with this community over the next year. And you'll just see some new, exciting, cool stuff happening with this community. So buckle up. We're going to get through Galatians, and then we'll probably do something by Paul Tillich, and then something from Dr. King, and then we'll freestyle it the rest of the year. Love you guys. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining me late today. And yeah, go out and practice this, or think about it. Think about areas where you could have shown more grace, or where you kind of turned right away from grace. You know, kind of think about that. If you write a journal or anything, just write it down. Kind of think about it and share it. You know, you can DM me on over at Jay Baker on Instagram or on the Revolution Instagram. But I would love to hear some of you, like, your examples. Maybe we could talk about that next week, of ways that we got it and then automatically turned away from it, you know, like, or just kept it for ourselves. So anyhow, lots of love, lots of grace. Peace.